All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we know 2023 preview and prediction for the North Carolina Tar Heels. One of his coaching staff, Mack Brown, is back. He has 277 wins all time. Chip Winsley, last year he spent with UCF. He's going to replace the departing Phil Longo. Gene Chizik and Charlton Warren, second year as co-defensive coordinators. The biggest headline for the Tar Heels is that defense is still looking to show some improvement following an ACC championship appearance. Look at this offense. Last year when we did our ACC predictions, my most improved player in the conference, the biggest breakout player, that would be, I labeled it as UNC quarterback, and Drake May ended up taking the reins over Jacoby Criswell, and I was right on the mark, at least in half the sense, Nick. 4,300 yards, 38 touchdowns. Drake May enters the year as the second-ranked quarterback in college football, high-end draft prospect. This is a player who has great poise, plays like a seasoned veteran, great touch, impressive arm strength and confidence. He's also a really good runner. He really reminds me a lot of Sam Howell, who was the starter for 3 years in seasons prior for them. He took over for Howell, of course, and this is a guy that took over as a freshman and shined, and May was able to do that also. So Mack Brown has certainly had these guys clicking here at quarterback, 6'5", 220, very identical size to that of Howell, and skill set. The quarterback position, Nick, has not been a problem for UNC, and it certainly allows this offense to continue to flourish. You look at who he's got to throw to. Devontae Walker, he transfers over from Kent State, a good natural playmaker who's dangerous in the open field. Really tracks the ball well downfield, short area quickness, and some strong hands to match that 6'3", 192 frame. Nate McCollum from Georgia Tech, great underneath slot option, plenty of out routes in his repertoire. Got some good open field speed, an elusive player who can embrace contact. This is a deep unit. J.J. Jones, 6'2", 210, only caught 3+ passes 3 times last year. He did catch a pass in 13 different games. I think he's going to be a big breakout star for them. Kobe Paysour, Gavin Blackwell, 2 redshirt freshmen that found notable time last year. Another tight end in Kamari Morales. The matchup of Bryson Nesbitt, a creative runner who's a great route runner. Some nice cuts. A fluid athlete who's got strong short area quickness, 6'5", 230. He is going to man that tight end position. Overall, this is a really good offense led by this passing attack. Drake May really impressed a lot of people last season, Nick. Didn't think you'd be that good, but man, was he impressive.
Drake May is an absolute superstar in college football. Really took the reins as a true freshman, absolutely dominated. The frame on Drake May is fantastic. 6'5" is a perfect height for me. 220, fantastic height and weight. Drake May is just a star. The stats don't lie. 66.2% completion percentage, 4,321 yards. 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He's composed in the pocket, good awareness, doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot, good focus. You kind of knew May was in the potential to be that breakout star after that first week against an FCS opponent. I know it was an FCS opponent, Florida A&M, but man, did he look amazing in that game. And he took off running from there. Just an absolutely electric quarterback, fantastic player. Thought about transferring. There were rumors he might transfer potentially Alabama or other bigger schools, but he stays at Carolina, committed to the program at Carolina. I'm excited to see what he can continue to do. This is a very good offense. There's a lot of nice receiving core here, nice cast of characters. Nesbitt, very solid player, 507 receiving yards, 14.5 yards per catch, 4 scores for him. J.J. Jones, 434, 18 yards per catch, and 2 scores for him. Morales, 358, 12.3, 4 scores. Paysour and Blackwell, both, they had over 200 yards receiving, 4 scores for Paysour. So this is a very deep unit in terms of wide receivers. There's a lot of talent here for May to throw to. He's got a good, versatile amount of weapons, and he's pretty good on his feet as well if necessary. He can make a move if he has to. Overall, Drake May is a very talented quarterback and the great guy to lead this offense.
Yeah, they lose their top 2 wide receivers. They return 3rd to 14th in terms of yards, so they have a lot of depth and experience here. 17th last year on 3rd downs. They return 6 starters, and you look at what they have in the backfield. It's just as deep. Elijah Green was barely used the first half of last year. Got plenty of work late in the season, produced very well. Amarian Hampton, Caleb Hood, British Brooks. Those guys are all 220-plus pounds, so not much in terms of being, shifty playmakers or game breakers here in this running back room. George Pettaway got some work in the first 2 weeks. This is overall really good running core for North Carolina, only 153.5 yards per contest, and Drake May was the leading rusher, 698 yards and 7 touchdowns. Elijah Green did have 558 and 8 touchdowns. Again, most of that was coming over the back half of the season. Of course, Sam Howell, his legs were heavily used in 2021, so they were right on par in terms of attempts from the quarterback. That was certainly expected. But I'd like to see these running backs get a little bit more involved in it, because I certainly think they have the talent there. Needs to be a bit more of a commitment, but they did have 500-plus rushing attempts last season, and, the average 4.2 certainly was not where they wanted to be, compared to a 5.4 they had in 2021. So that certainly took a dip. And now you have Phil Longo, who departs, who really understands this air raid system a lot. Chip Winsley, he has a lot to work with here, though.
I agree. There's a nice running back core here. Elijah Green, good back. 558 yards on the ground, 8 scores for him. Amarian Hampton as well, not a bad back, 400 yards on the ground, 6 scores for him. And then you got Petway as well at the bottom. I think this is a very deep running back room. I like the talent here. If they can find the way to balance it and be able to run the ball a little more often, I think it'll be very beneficial for this offense.
In 2021, this offensive line was flat out awful, and I thought they were going to be even worse last year. They lost numerous guys to the NFL draft. They weren't as bad as expected, 115th in sacks allowed. Certainly as poor as they could be. And they do lose Sim Richards, another guy, to the NFL. So they do have some strong individual talents year after year. Willie Lampkin, he comes over from Coastal Carolina. He was the center for them a season ago. He's likely going to slot into one of the guard positions maybe. Quick explosion off the snap, great hand placement, some good power to move defenders, a good feel on those reach combo blocks, 6 foot 275. Ed Montelis was a disaster at left guard, had 31 pressures, 5 sacks, had 9 penalties. Corey Gaynor was a solid pass blocker at his center position. Both had 1,050 snaps each a season ago. Spencer Rowland was abysmal at right tackle, allowing the 6th most pressures in FBS with 43, also gave up 6 sacks. William Barnes, he gave up 27 pressures at right guard. He looks to cook outside to left tackle to accommodate Willie Lampkin, who was probably going to slot into that guard position, but can play center if he chooses to or if they need him to do that. This offensive line has been a big struggle, Nick. A-minus offense for me, but if they could ever figure out this O-line, this would be an Ohio State-like offense potentially in terms of production. I think that's one thing that certainly goes unnoticed, is how poor this O-line is. That's a big reason why I think this offense stalled out over the last 4 games of the season. And the red zone efficiencies also struggled with, a smaller field radius to work with. The O-line really needs to get better. Will it happen this year?
Certainly need to find a way to improve the O-line. I think they did make some progress by going and grabbing Willie Lampkin. Solid piece to come over from Coastal Carolina. I like him at right guard there. These guys, the 4 guys that played last year, sure, it's positive return, 4 starters, but the guys they return, the production just has been poor. Too many penalties, too many mistakes, too many pressures. I'm looking at Barnes. He's got to have a better season at left tackle. Did not play great at right tackle. Rowland has to play better at right tackle. Having Lampkin on his other side might help, kind of coach him a little bit, lead him through that. But overall, this offensive line has been so bad. And it's really the one thing holding back this offense that otherwise is incredibly deep, incredibly talented, and incredibly full of production.
This offense had less than 400 yards in the last 4 games last year. They also scored less than 30 points in those games, coming off a 6-game winning streak. They lost those 4 games at the end of the year, Nick. There's going to be an incredibly sour taste in the mouth of this offense coming into the season. Will that linger? What is the expectation going to be this year, especially with Longo departing? I think that's something that certainly is worth monitoring. But this offense did not click, and the rest of the football team suffered, even when the defense was given some unexpected outs, like in the game against Oregon and Georgia Tech.
I agree. They certainly had the defense played a little bit better the second half of the season, and the offense just kind of stalled out. The transition under the coaching staff is going to be interesting. I think this offense will take a step back. The numbers will be a little bit worse this season, but I think this offense has a lot of talent, and Drake May is the ultimate guy to be your quarterback. I think he's a fantastic piece to have, and certainly an amazing wild card.
Yeah, I think with the receivers they picked up with May, I think they'll certainly produce better yards, and I think they'll score a few more points. But in terms of efficiency, that certainly remains to be seen. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, this has really just been a struggle unit for the Tar Heels. You look at the numbers last year, 116th in yards and passing yards per game, outside the top 100 points allowed also. They lost 12 players in the portal, added 5, 4 of them in the secondary, so big commitment on that side of the ball. Good news is they return 8 starters. The run defense was awful the first month of the season. They gave up 235-plus yards in 3 straight games, allowed 170-plus only 4 more times, so they certainly did see some solid progression. They did struggle in games versus Pitt. They struggled against Clemson overall, but not a good run D overall for this football team. They do have a nice defensive line though. Kamon Rucker, who's a quick, instinctive player, great balance, matched with strong core, great motor. Doesn't always shed well, a high grade in all facets. Isn't great with flexibility or isn't the greatest pursuit man, but at 6'2", 265, I think he's the best player coming off the edge for them. Miles Murphy on the interior was on the field a good bit. 6'4", 305 wasn't all that great, though. Kevin Hester was quite good tackler. Tamari Fox, his return should be helpful. Javari Z comes back. Some good experience and depth on this interior D-line. And then Desmond Evans was also a solid run stopper at the defensive end position, but had no production. Neither did the rest of this team. 120th in FBS with only 17 sacks. I like what this team has on the defensive line, Nick. I said that coming into last year. They've just not stepped up yet. And they did show up very well against Clemson in a game they allowed a lot of passing yards. But games like Duke, or Pittsburgh rather, they only gave up 131. They still got grinded down on. So the stat sheet doesn't tell the full story, but they were just not good at all against the run. But they certainly had their moments because there was a handful of games where they allowed less than 70 yards per contest, 4 of them, matter of fact.
There are some talented pieces on this front defensive line. I do like Kevin Hester a lot. 49 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss. Not a bad piece to have. Rucker, I think he's a good player. Gets in the backfield, good player. 37 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. That's the highest number on the team last year, which is a really low number for your highest sack total. You want to see that number get higher. Miles Murphy, good run stopper, 29 total tackles for him, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. Desmond Evans, I like to see him step up. He only played in 8 games, 25 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss. So there is some serious production here, potentially in terms of the talent. These guys are good. Ritzy's another guy that's solid, 48 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and 1 sack for him. I like to see these numbers certainly get higher. There's a lot of nice talent here, but the production just hasn't been there. They have to find a way to get after the quarterback and stop some of these teams on the ground.
Now, in the middle of the defense, they have some true heat. Cedric Gray's a guy that got singled out a season ago as a player that likely will be a leader for this unit. Man, did he step up in a big way. 146 tackles, 12 tackle for loss, had 3 forced fumbles and 6 pass breakups, a do-it-all linebacker. Elite production is the best way you could put it this past season. Some quick feet that allows him to get through traffic. Very good closing speed in the open field to make tackles. He's an effective wrap-up tackler. Good length, very instinctive player with some good athletic ability. Really showcased everything last year, especially as a run stopper. Amari Gainer comes over from Florida State. He was a really consistent player for the Noles, but how will he handle a big load of snaps is the main question. Power Eccles was an effective pass rusher who also had 100-plus tackles. These linebackers had to do a lot of heavy lifting, the run defense being really poor because of some of the lack of of production and ability to penetrate up front. Certainly allowed these guys to kind of run the numbers up a little bit, Nick, but what Cedric Gray did was just elite numbers from him. What are the expectations from this linebacking core? Probably the best unit on the football team.
Certainly great to return your 2 top tacklers who both had over 100 tackles. Cedric Gray, just a do-it-all type of guy. 145 total tackles, just an incredible number. Really just a fantastic number. 12 tackles for loss, plus a sack, 2 interceptions, 6 pass breakups, 3 forced fumbles. I mean, this guy did it all. He was really the only lifebeat of this defense. I mean, without him, they had been totally lost. Fantastic player. The numbers are so impressive. He had 20 more solo tackles than he had assisted tackles, which is another important number I think to look at. Power Eccles, good players, 103 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, plus a pick for him. Good numbers of those two. Randy Caldwell as well as a guy deeper down the depth chart who played a few snaps here and there in 14 games. I like him potentially being involved. He had 6 tackles in limited appearances. Plus they grabbed the talented player in Gainer from Florida State. So overall, this is a very good unit. This linebacking core is fantastic. Those 4 guys there are all very talented. Week in, week out, there's so much production out of those 4 guys. I like that group a lot.
You look at the secondary, DeAndre Boykins, he was a great run defender from the slot, but was a liability in coverage, but he returns as one of the top defensive backs on this football team. Marcus Allen was quite solid in his 5 games last year. He got plenty of reps. Elijah Huzzy was an elite player for East Tennessee State. He transfers to the FBS level. He's going to occupy one of the other cornerback spots. Armani Chapman, great experience from Virginia Tech. Derek Allen from Georgia Tech at the safety position. He was a good tackler. That's about it from them. Giovanni Biggers, 6'2", 200, was the 3rd leading tackler. Don Chapman in his 10 games was good for them, and a important returnee in the back end. Biggest problem here, Nick, is the development at the cornerback position has just really not been evident one bit. You look at what they had in Tony Grimes, a former 5-star, didn't play really good at all. He did not live up to the expectations one bit. He's now in College Station. Storm Duck was a really good player, but I think a lot was certainly left on the table with him. They had some really talented players, guys like Cameron Kelly as well. Over the past couple of years, they've had some good talent in the secondary. They've just not really put it together. Is that going to change? We still seem to have the same staff put in place under Mac Brown, so it's going to be hard to expect that. But I think with some of these new transfers, maybe there's some hope.
Gene Chizik's defense left a lot to be desired, especially his secondary. You really didn't think his secondary would struggle like it did. Giovanni Biggers is a good player. 69 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss for him. Boykins, good hard hitter. I like him on the run defense. 67 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 7 pass breakups. Led the team, tied with Tony Grimes in that number. Solid numbers there, plus a pick for him. Don Chapman, good player in limited appearances. 32 total tackles, 3 pass breakups. The secondary has to step up. The numbers last year were just pathetic. They did not live up to the expectations at all. They got to find a way to step up and be able to produce. I mean, the pass yards per game, 271.3 is just not a good enough number. 116th in the nation. The points per game total way too high as well at 30 points per game. These numbers got to come down somehow. They got to find a way to get this better secondary cooking, because there are some talented pieces here. I know they lost Grimes and Storm Duck, but there is still a lot of talent in the secondary. They got to find a way to play together and play better.
The defense certainly has some good upside, some good ball players at all levels, but not much has changed over the past few seasons, Nick. A tad bit of improvement will certainly happen, but can't expect much here. I've been burned too many times expecting this defense to step up and really help this offense that's been really good out, and they've just not been able to do so. So I'm going to go B- here. I like the D-line. I think they've got some good pieces, nice rotation. The linebacking core has some good production as well. And the secondary has some new parts also that might be able to step up. So I think overall this is a very hopeful and exciting unit. But again, I've been burned too many times playing this whole story, expecting them to step up.
I agree. It's definitely a cautious tale. You got to be careful here. I think a B is appropriate for this defense. There's a lot of talent here, but you got to find a way to get this talent out of them. They got burned so many times last year. It's certainly concerning. I have to see it before I believe it.
Now looking at the schedule preview and prediction, the offense has an elite quarterback with a deep receiving core to work with. This offensive line has been abysmal, but the running game will provide ample balance. Another position that's quite deep with some nice options. The defense really needs to take shape, and it has the pieces to do so, but the team's success is certainly capped until further notice. I think when you look at who I have them losing to, it makes sense. This is a very interesting schedule. 7-5 seems a little rough for this football team, but South Carolina, you play them in Charlotte, it's going to be a tough one. You host Minnesota. Joe Rossi and PJ Fleck have gotten that defense figured out. It's going to be hard to crack. And schematically, they do not match up very well with Minnesota one bit. Same could be said about Miami. Duke, love what they bring to the table on both sides of the ball. And then the Clemson Tigers absolutely steamrolled them last year when they had the chance to win the crown of this conference. And then teams like App State, Nick, they should have lost that game. They allowed 61 points. That game was incredibly exciting. I don't know how they won that one. A lot of luck was involved on that side of things. And the games they won last year, 2 against Wake Forest, a 3-point win against Virginia. They ran over Pittsburgh, beat Duke by 3. Same with Miami the week earlier. So this team is really hard to expect them to do much. I mean, they only beat Georgia State by a touchdown and an extra point. So some of the wins they had last year could have easily went the other way. So I think 7-5 is a very reasonable mark here, especially with the teams they're going against. These teams might all be ranked come the end of the season. So I think this is a very tough schedule for them. 7-5 for me. But I mean, considering how last year went, they could easily find themselves not in the postseason.
At first glance, 7-5 looks a little harsh, but then you really look at the schedule and look at how it is. It's a tough schedule on paper. Trips to Pittsburgh, Clemson, NC State, very tough games. South Carolina in Charlotte, tough matchup. Minnesota out of conference, not easy. App State, they're no pushover. Obviously, we saw that last year of App State beating A&M and almost beating UNC at home. Miami, Duke, 2 solid teams. This is a tough schedule. Certainly, I think 7-5 makes sense right now. You could maybe push it to 8-4. I think they might pick off maybe a Miami or a Minnesota and get lucky at home, something like that. But overall, this is a tough schedule. A lot of talent on these rosters they're facing. I like that they're playing South Carolina. I'm glad they're getting that rivalry in here every once in a while. I think that's a brutal backstretch of the season, the final 3 games. At home, Duke, at Clemson, at NC State. Tough draw, certainly there. At Pitt, you never really know with Pitt. That's a tough spot to play, certainly. This is a very tough schedule, top to bottom. UNC could be in for a tough year this year if the defense does not figure itself out.
Now, I certainly don't expect this to happen, even when it comes to the season finale. Maybe not even the bowl game, but Drake May could certainly sit out at any moment with the NFL draft in his future. So if things are going sideways for this football team, that's something that could certainly be on the table for him, even though the loyalty to this university, highly unlikely, but something certainly to monitor, Nick, especially with the rest of this team that may give up if things are going south. I don't anticipate any of that happening, but certainly plenty of storylines to watch because this team did, again, win a lot of close games last year, and winning those games allowed them to go to the ACC championship game. So there's a lot for this team to play for, but certainly some minor headlines I would keep an eye on.
I agree. I think Drake May is certainly a wild card. He may transfer at the end of the season, may just sit out and try and wait for the NFL draft. So there certainly is a lot on the table for UNC. They got to find a way to start winning games early on. If they can get those early games September and go undefeated into the game against Miami in the middle of October, that'd be a really good spot to be. But I really just don't see that happening. I think this is going to be a struggle early on in the season. It's going to be a tough back half of the season as well.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time. As always, Nick, I appreciate you joining me.
Absolutely.